My name is Mallory Catherine Hayes, and am 32 years old. I walked into my parents' dining room expecting birthday cake and found betrayal instead. The table was set, candles flickering, but the air felt wrong. My brother Garrett's truck was already parked outside, which was unusual since he always arrived late. Mom and Dad exchanged nervous glances as I sat down. Then Dad cleared his throat and said the words that would change everything. "We need to discuss the land." Mom slid a document across the table. My eyes scanned the page and stopped cold at the sale price. 40 acres. To Garrett Hayes. For 50 cents. The land my grandpa left me. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Dad said, and Garrett smirked. Before we dive deeper into this nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you think family loyalty should go both ways, hit that like button. And please subscribe because this story is about to get absolutely wild. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next, and I need you here for every twist and turn. Let me take you back so you understand what this land meant to me. Those 40 acres in rural Montana weren't just property. They were my childhood, my identity, my connection to the only parent who truly loved me. My biological mother abandoned our family when I was 8 years old. She just walked out one afternoon and never came back. My father remarried Marlene 2 years later, and she brought my half-brother Garrett into our lives. But I never fit into their new family portrait. My grandfather, Theodore Hayes, everyone called him Ted, saw how lost I was. From age 8 until I left for college, I spent every summer, every holiday, every possible moment on his 40 acres. He taught me everything. How to read the weather by watching the clouds gather over the mountains. How to fish in the creek that ran through the property. And how to clean what we caught. How to mend fences and stack firewood and recognize animal tracks in fresh snow. That land was where I learned I mattered. When Grandpa died 4 years ago, his handwritten will was crystal clear. The 40 acres went to me, Mallory Catherine Hayes, and nobody else. The property had been appraised at $450,000 because our little Montana town was expanding, and developers were circling. But I never cared about the money. I cared about preserving what Grandpa built, what he loved, what he wanted me to protect. Now, sitting at that birthday dinner table, my parents were explaining why they'd given it all away. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like this was just a reasonable business decision. "Garrett needs it more, Mallory. He has a family to support. My brother's wife and 2 kids, ages 6 and 9, were apparently more important than a dead man's wishes. You're single," Mom added, her voice dripping with judgment. "You have that fancy job in Seattle. You don't need land in Montana." I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm and ask the logical questions. How is this even legal? Grandpa's will specifically left it to me. That's when the real betrayal emerged. Dad, who'd worked as a county clerk for 30 years before retiring, smiled slightly. "I know people at the registrar's office. The paperwork is all in order." I grabbed the document, studying it more carefully. There at the bottom was my signature, except Eid never signed anything. "This is forged," I said, my voice shaking. "You forged my signature." Garrett laughed. Actually laughed, and said the words that made my blood run cold. "It's done, Mal. We took care of it 6 months ago. Remember when you came home for Christmas? You left your purse in the living room one night. Dad just needed a sample of your signature from those holiday cards you signed. Modern technology makes the rest pretty easy. 6 months. They'd been sitting on this fraud for half a year, acting normal during phone calls, pretending everything was fine during our weekly video chats. And the worst part was yet to come. Garrett pulled out his phone and showed me a bank transfer. Already sold the timber rights for $80,000. Got a developer interested in subdividing the whole thing. We're looking at some serious money here. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. This wasn't about need. This was about greed. They'd systematically planned to steal my inheritance, and they'd executed that plan while smiling to my face for months. I stood up from the table, my untouched birthday cake mocking me with its cheerful candles. "I'm going to fight this legally. I'm going to expose what you did. Dad's expression hardened. With what proof? I have 3 decades of relationships in this county. Every judge, every clerk, every official knows and trusts me. You'll lose, and you'll waste a fortune trying. Mom reached for my hand, and I jerked away. Honey, you're being selfish. Family helps family. This is what's best for everyone. I walked out, and behind me I heard Mom call out, "You're breaking your father's heart." No, I thought as I drove away with tears finally streaming down my face. They broke mine first. I couldn't sleep that night in my Seattle apartment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that document, that forged signature, Garrett's smirk. At 7 in the morning, I called my friend Sutton Blake, an attorney I'd met through work. She practiced corporate law, not real estate, but she knew the system. That's fraud, Mallory. Clear-cut fraud and forgery. You need a specialist. She recommended Harrison Cole, a property lawyer in Montana with 48 years of age and a reputation for handling messy family disputes. I booked a flight for the next afternoon and brought every document I'd photographed from that nightmare birthday dinner. Harrison's office was modest, filled with law books and case files stacked on every surface. He studied the papers for 20 minutes before looking up at me with grim eyes. "Your signature is definitely forged. I've seen enough of these cases to recognize the telltale signs. The transaction is fraudulent, and we can fight it." Then came the part that made my stomach drop. "But it's going to be expensive and time-consuming. We're looking at legal fees between $75,000 and $100,000, and it could take years. How much can you afford?" I had $42,000 in savings. It wasn't nearly enough. As if the universe wanted to punish me further, I discovered something horrifying when I tried to apply for a personal loan to cover legal costs. My credit score had dropped 300 points. 300. I'd always been obsessive about paying bills on time, never carried credit card debt, and maintained excellent credit. Now, according to the report, I had 7 credit cards I'd never opened with a combined debt of $68,000. All of them listed shipping addresses at my parents' house in Montana. I sat in Harrison's office, staring at the credit report, and felt reality crumbling around me. Garrett had stolen more than land. During that Christmas visit, when I'd stayed in my old bedroom, he must have gone through my desk where I'd stupidly left old college paperwork with my social security number on financial aid documents. Head committed identity theft, specifically to destroy my ability to fight back legally. The credit card bills had been going to my parents' house, where they'd probably been throwing them away or paying minimums to keep the accounts active long enough to tank my credit. Harrison made some calls while I sat there in shock. Within an hour, he confirmed that collections agencies had started calling. My credit was effectively destroyed, which meant no bank would loan me money for legal fees. I was trapped exactly as they'd planned, but then things got worse. I received an email from my company's human resources department. "A formal complaint has been filed regarding your conduct. We are launching an investigation into allegations that you falsified expense reports. You are suspended with pay pending the outcome of this investigation." I called my boss immediately, nearly hyperventilating. "I've never falsified anything. Who filed this complaint?" She couldn't tell me, but her tone suggested she half believed the accusations. When Harrison's IT consultant friend traced the IP address of the anonymous complaint email, we found it originated from Garrett's home computer in Montana. They weren't just stealing my past. They were destroying my present and future. My job, which paid $92,000 per year and was the foundation of my financial independence, hung by a thread because of lies my brother told. I tried calling my parents. Neither answered. I sent text messages begging them to stop, to talk to me, to explain why they were doing this. Mom finally responded, "You brought this on yourself. Just let it go. Sign the release papers Garrett's lawyer will send, and we can all move forward as a family. Let it go." They wanted me to surrender everything Grandpa built, everything he meant to give me, and pretend it was fine. I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by documents, legal papers, credit reports, and that birthday dinner contract. I looked at an old photo I kept on my bookshelf. Me at age 10 standing next to Grandpa on his land, his weathered hand on my shoulder, both of us grinning at the camera. Head written on the back. Mallory Girl and Her Land, Summer 2003. Grandpa had called it her land even then, 15 years before he died. Had always known what he wanted. And I remembered something else he used to say when I got discouraged about school or friends or my complicated family. Bad people count on good people giving up, Mallory Girl. Don't ever give them that satisfaction. I wiped my tears, straightened my spine, and made a decision. I wasn't giving up. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight. Sutton Blake called me the next morning with an offer that made me cry with relief. I'll handle the identity theft case pro bono. Credit card fraud is federal. And I have a friend at the FBI field office who owes me a favor. We're going to nail Garrett for this. We filed a police report in Seattle and another in Montana. The credit card companies began freezing the fraudulent accounts. It was a slow process that would take months to fully resolve, but at least it was moving in the right direction. Meanwhile, I scraped together enough money for a 10-hour drive back to Montana. I needed to see the land, to walk on it, to remember why I was fighting. But I also needed evidence, and I knew exactly where to look. The county registrar's office held all the documents related to the land transfer. When I walked in and requested copies, the clerk on duty, a woman about my age with hard eyes, recognized my last name immediately. "Those records are sealed pending litigation," she said coldly. I hadn't filed any litigation yet, so her answer made no sense. Under the Freedom of Information Act, I have a right to access public records about my own property. She pursed her lips, clearly frustrated. "You'll need to file a formal written request." Fine. I drafted the request on Harrison's letterhead and returned 3 days later. While waiting for those documents, I spent time in town, which felt surreal. I'd grown up here, but after a decade in Seattle, I was an outsider. I stopped at the local diner for coffee, trying to blend in, when an elderly woman approached my booth. "You're Ted Hayes' granddaughter," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Dorothy Jean Whitfield. I was your grandpa's neighbor for 40 years. Dorothy had to be in her mid-70s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. She slid into the booth across from me without asking permission. "Your grandpa would be sick about what Boyd and Garrett are doing." My throat tightened at hearing someone else acknowledge the injustice. Dorothy reached into her large purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I witnessed your grandpa's will signing. He did it at my kitchen table because he didn't trust going to a lawyer in town. Said Boyd had too many friends who might talk. I have a copy of the original will." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. There it was, in Grandpa's careful handwriting, dated 4 years and 2 months ago. "I, Theodore Hayes, being of sound mind, leave my 40 acres to my granddaughter Mallory Catherine Hayes. This land is not to be sold or transferred for a minimum of 10 years after my death. It is her birthright and her future." Dorothy explained what happened after Grandpa died. "Your father took the will to probate court, claimed the original was unclear about Grandpa's intentions, got a judge to approve a modified version that gave him and your mother control as executors. The judge was Raymond Pierce, plays poker with Boyd every Thursday night. The corruption went deeper than I'd imagined. A judge had helped my father steal my inheritance, probably in exchange for who knows what favors over the years. Dorothy also gave me something else, a thick folder containing old property surveys, photographs of the original boundary markers, and documentation of every improvement Grandpa had made to the land over 40 years. Your grandpa loved you more than anything, honey. He told me 100 times that you were the only one who understood what that land meant. He'd want you to fight for it." I hugged Dorothy, this stranger who was showing me more loyalty than my own blood family. She became my second ally in a war I hadn't chosen but couldn't abandon. That night, I stayed at a small motel on the edge of town. At 2 in the morning, someone started pounding on my door. Male voices shouted, "You need to leave town. Nobody wants you here." I grabbed my phone and called 911, but by the time I reached the door to look through the peephole, the voices had disappeared. The sheriff who responded was an old friend of my father's. He looked around the parking lot with exaggerated thoroughness and said it was probably just kids pranking. Maybe you should head back to Seattle, Mallory. Folks around here don't appreciate outsiders stirring up trouble. I wasn't an outsider. I was born here, but I understood the message clearly. The next morning, I found all 4 of my truck tires slashed. The motel manager, a sympathetic woman named Ruth, showed me security footage. 2 men in uniforms from Garrett's construction company had done it at 4 in the morning. "I'm sorry, honey," Ruth said. "Your family has a lot of influence around here." I called Harrison Cole and told him everything. "Document it all," he advised. "Install security cameras wherever you stay. File for a restraining order. And Mallory, be careful. Desperate people do desperate things." Sutton connected me with an investigative journalist named Ramona Pierce, no relation to the corrupt judge, who specialized in stories about small-town corruption. Ramona drove up from Billings to interview me, and I gave her everything. The forged will, Dorothy's testimony, the credit card fraud, the intimidation. "This is bigger than your family," Ramona said, her recorder running. "If a county clerk and a judge are collaborating to steal property, how many other families have they done this to?" That question opened a new avenue of investigation. I rented a small cabin outside town, away from the motel where I'd been harassed, and installed security cameras around the perimeter. That first night, I watched through the window as a truck drove slowly past 3 times. I recognized it. The vehicle belonged to Clifford Dunn, Garrett's business partner, a man I'd met twice and never liked. He was checking to see where I was staying, probably reporting back to Garrett. I barely slept, my phone clutched in one hand, ready to call for help. But the attack I feared didn't come that night. They were waiting, planning something worse. Ramona Pierce started digging into Judge Raymond Pierce's case history, and what she found was stunning. Over 12 years, the judge had presided over at least 8 probate cases, where property mysteriously ended up in the hands of people connected to my father. A widow lost her farm to her nephew, who happened to be my father's golfing buddy. An elderly man's estate went to a distant cousin who worked in the county assessor's office. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Judge Pierce and my father had been running a systematic scheme to redistribute property through fraudulent probate proceedings. Ramona planned to publish, but she needed more concrete evidence, more testimony, more documentation. Meanwhile, my life continued falling apart in new and creative ways. Garrett filed a restraining order against me, claiming I'd been stalking him and his family. His evidence included photos of my truck parked near his house. Never mind that I'd been driving through town to reach the registrar's office, and his house happened to be on Main Street. He also presented text messages as proof of harassment, messages where I'd simply asked to talk about the land situation. The court date was set for 2 weeks out, and I realized how skillfully they were boxing me in. Dorothy called me to her house one afternoon, her voice urgent on the phone. When I arrived, she led me to her spare bedroom, where cardboard boxes lined the walls. "I've kept journals for 30 years, she explained. "Your grandpa and I used to have coffee every Sunday morning, and he told me things. I wrote them down." She opened a journal from 3 years before Grandpa's death. There, in Dorothy's neat handwriting, was an entry that made my blood run cold. "Ted came over upset today. Said Boyd asked him to reconsider his will, to split the land between Mallory and Garrett. Ted refused. Told Boyd the land goes to Mallory because she's the only one who loves it like he does. Boyd got angry, said Ted was playing favorites. Ted said, 'Damn right he is,' and Boyd stormed out." Another entry from 2 years later. "Ted went to town today and changed his will officially. Came back and told me Boyd's been pressuring him for months. Ted doesn't trust his own son-in-law anymore. Says everything goes to Mallory, not a penny to Boyd or Garrett." The journals were a roadmap of my father's campaign to control the inheritance and Grandpa's resistance to that pressure. Ramona's investigation uncovered the financial motive I'd suspected but hadn't proven. The Town Planning Commission had approved a major development project 18 months ago, a new highway exit and shopping complex within half a mile of my 40 acres. Once construction began, land values in the area would skyrocket. Current appraisals put my property at $450,000, but within 3 years, it would be worth $1.2 million or more. Garrett had attended that planning commission meeting. Public records showed Head voted yes on the development as a member of the local business council. Head known about this before stealing the land. Head planned the whole thing with full knowledge of the future windfall. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was calculated, premeditated fraud. And then my world collapsed completely at work. My company finished its investigation into the falsified expense reports. They'd found evidence. Receipts with my signature that E'd never submitted, for meals and hotels E'd never expensed. The signature was forged using the same technique that had been used on the land transfer documents, but my employer didn't care about the nuance. I was terminated for gross misconduct. They refused severance pay because of the ethics violation. In one meeting, I lost my $92,000 salary, my health insurance, and my professional reputation. I sat in the cabin that night and calculated my financial situation. My savings were down to $28,000 after paying for the cabin rental, Harrison's initial retainer, flights back and forth to Montana, and living expenses while not working. Legal fees were mounting. I couldn't afford to continue fighting at this pace. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer, but I recognized my mother's number. "See what happens when you're stubborn," she said, her voice cold. "You've lost your job, you're burning through money, and for what? Come apologize to your brother. Well, make this right. You can have $10,000 as compensation for the land. And well, all move forward." $10,000 for property worth $500,000 and climbing. It was insulting. You destroyed my credit, cost me my career, and committed fraud. And you think $10,000 fixes that? I asked. She sighed dramatically. "You're being a child, Mallory. Family is supposed to forgive." I hung up and broke down completely. I was alone, broke, unemployed, and fighting an enemy with infinite resources and no conscience. Dorothy found me the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, surrounded by tissues and empty coffee mugs. I'd been crying on and off all night. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me on the cabin's small couch and held my hand. After 10 minutes of silence, she spoke. "I lost my husband to cancer 15 years ago. Medical bills almost took our farm. I was ready to give up, let the bank have it, move into town. But then I remembered something. Giving up is what they want. The moment you quit, they win forever." She told me about fighting the bank, negotiating payment plans, working 3 jobs to save her land. "I kept the farm because I refused to let them break me. Your grandpa loved my stubbornness. He'd love yours too." Dorothy offered to mortgage her property to help fund my legal battle, and I refused immediately. I couldn't let this kind woman risk everything for me, but her faith in me restored something I'd lost. That night, the breakthrough came. Ramona called, nearly breathless with excitement. She'd found a county employee willing to talk off the record. Someone who'd witnessed the corruption firsthand and couldn't stay silent anymore. The employee had copies of the original transaction records showing the real timeline of the fraudulent land transfer. With immunity from prosecution, he'd testify. Harrison Cole reviewed the new evidence with barely contained excitement. "This changes everything. We've got documentation of the fraud, timeline evidence, and an inside witness. It's time to go on offense." Our strategy became multi-pronged. File criminal complaints for fraud, forgery, and identity theft with local police and the FBI. Simultaneously file a civil suit to void the land transfer. Request a federal investigation into wire fraud since the identity theft had crossed state lines. The county employee willing to testify was Palmer Eugene Wright, 56 years old, who'd worked in the registrar's office for 28 years. Palmer was tired of watching corruption destroy families and wanted to retire with his conscience clear. He agreed to testify in exchange for immunity and protection from retaliation. The documents he provided were devastating. Original transaction logs showing my father had paid the registrar's clerk $12,000 in cash. Emails between my father and the clerk discussing timing of the fraudulent transfer. Bank deposit records proving the bribe had been paid. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was systematic criminal conspiracy. While we built the legal case, Garrett launched a social media war. He created Facebook posts with old family photos, adding captions that painted me as mentally unstable and greedy. My sister abandoned our family years ago. One post read, above a photo from my college graduation. Now she wants money that isn't hers. Another showed me at a family Christmas years ago, before any of this started, with the caption, "This is what greed looks like." She makes 6 figures in Seattle but wants to take food from her nephew and niece's mouths. The posts went viral locally. I started receiving messages from extended family members, aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in years, telling me I was tearing the family apart. My grandmother, my father's mother, called and screamed at me for 10 minutes. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of you," she shouted. "Family is everything, and you're destroying ours for money." I tried to explain that this wasn't about money, that they'd forged documents and committed crimes, but she hung up on me. The town was choosing sides, and most chose the Hayes family they'd known for decades over the granddaughter who'd left for the city. Then Garrett escalated to something truly vicious. He and his wife filed an emergency custody complaint about my goddaughter. I'd been asked to be godmother to my friend Lori Donovan's daughter 5 years ago. It was an honor I took seriously, even though it was mostly symbolic. Garrett somehow filed a complaint with Washington State Child Protective Services, claiming I was a dangerous influence on the child. He cited my criminal behavior, referencing the restraining order had fraudulently obtained, and claimed I had violent tendencies. Lori called me in a panic. "CPS showed up at my house. They're asking questions about you, about whether you should be around children." "Mallory, what's happening?" I had to explain the entire nightmare to her, and even though she believed me, the damage was done. She now had to defend herself against an investigation because I was her friend. Garrett was systematically destroying every relationship I had, making me toxic to everyone around me. That's when Ramona published her first major article, "Montana Family's Land Dispute Uncovers Potential Corruption." The story laid out the basics of the case, interviewed Palmer Wright using anonymous attribution, and raised questions about Judge Pierce's role in multiple suspicious probate cases. The local newspaper, which happened to be owned by Judge Pierce's brother-in-law, immediately published a counter-article, entitled "Daughter Attacks Hardworking Family Over Inheritance." The headline screamed. The story painted my father as a humble civil servant who devoted his life to the community, Garrett as a struggling family man trying to build a future, and me as a bitter, spoiled woman who couldn't accept that I wasn't the favorite child. The town divided along generational lines. Older residents who remembered Grandpa Ted started speaking up cautiously in my favor. Younger residents, many of whom worked with or for people in my father's social circle, sided against me. And then came the 8th attack. I received a notice from the county tax assessor. Property taxes on the 40 acres hadn't been paid in 18 months. The bill had been sent to the owner of record, which was now Garrett, and had ignored every notice. The county was threatening a tax lien sale. In 45 days, if the $38,000 tax bill wasn't paid, the property would be auctioned to the highest bidder. I didn't have $38,000. My savings were down to $18,000. Harrison explained the implications. If the property goes to tax sale, your case gets exponentially harder. A third party could buy it, and then you'd have to prove fraud against them, not just your family. I sat in the cabin, staring at the tax notice, feeling the walls close in from every direction. Criminal charges were moving forward but slowly. The civil case was months away from trial. My credit was still destroyed. I had no job and dwindling savings, and in 45 days, I'd lose the land forever, regardless of how strong my legal case was. I called my parents one last time, begging them to pay the tax bill since Garrett was technically the owner of record. My father laughed. You should have just accepted things, Mallory. This is what happens when you fight family. I seriously considered bankruptcy. I'd lose everything anyway. So why keep throwing money into this pit? But then something unexpected happened. Dorothy organized a community meeting at the local Grange Hall. She invited everyone who'd known Grandpa Ted, everyone who remembered what kind of man had been. About 60 people showed up, mostly farmers and longtime residents in their 60s and 70s. Dorothy stood at the front of the room and told my story, the whole story, holding nothing back. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Russell Dean Carter, a 68-year-old farmer who'd worked alongside my grandpa for 40 years, stood up. Ted Hayes was the finest man I knew, Russell said, his voice steady and strong. If he wanted Mallory to have that land, that's how it should be. And I'm not going to stand by while his son and grandson steal it. Russell pulled out his checkbook and wrote a check for $5,000. This is my contribution to the tax bill, he said. Other hands went up around the room. A rancher pledged $2,000. The owner of the feed supply store pledged $1,000. Dorothy's neighbor pledged $1,500. Within an hour, commitments totaled $22,000. Dorothy posted about it on the community Facebook page, and more donations came in online. 3 days later, I had $41,000, more than enough to pay the tax bill with 1 day to spare. I drove to the county assessor's office and paid in full, getting a receipt that I immediately copied and sent to Harrison. The property was safe from tax sale. When Garrett found out, he lost control in a very public way. He showed up at the courthouse while I was leaving and started screaming at me in the parking lot. "You think these old hicks can save you? My dad and I will bury you. We've got money and connections, and you've got nothing." The sheriff witnessed the entire confrontation but did nothing to intervene. However, Ramona's photographer happened to be there and captured the whole thing. The photo of Garrett, red-faced and screaming, with me standing calmly beside my truck, ran in the regional newspaper the next day. Public opinion started shifting. People began asking questions. If Garrett's case was so righteous, why was he acting unhinged? If I was the greedy villain, why was the community rallying behind me? The investigation took an unexpected turn when Dorothy found something disturbing while helping me organize documents. She'd been sorting through old letters and papers I'd retrieved from Grandpa's cabin before Garrett could destroy them. At the bottom of a box of correspondence, she found letters that weren't from Grandpa at all. They were between my mother, Marlene, and Garrett, dated over a 3-year period starting before Grandpa's death. Dorothy's hands shook as she handed them to me. "Mallory, you need to read these." The first letter, written by my mother to Garrett, made bile rise in my throat. "When your grandfather dies, we need a plan. That land should be yours, not hers. You're the son of this family, even if he never saw it that way. I'll talk to your father about options." My mother, who I'd always viewed as a passive follower in my father's shadow, had been the architect of this entire scheme. Another letter laid out strategy. "We can't contest the will directly, too obvious. Boyd knows people in probate court. If we can get the will modified through proper channels, it'll look legitimate." She'd researched every angle, planned every move. The betrayal cut deeper than anything my father or brother had done, because I'd never suspected my mother capable of this level of manipulation. She'd always seemed kind but weak, dominated by my father's stronger personality. Now I understood it had been an act. She resented me because Grandpa had preferred me over her biological son, Garrett. She'd spent years watching Grandpa teach me, include me, love me, while Garrett got polite tolerance at best. That jealousy had festered into something toxic. Another letter revealed her specific ideas. Make it a real transaction, not a gift. 50 cents means it's a legal sale, not a transfer. I've been practicing her signature. It's not that complicated. My mother had spent weeks forging my signature, perfecting it, preparing to steal from me. Dorothy found practice sheets in a box of craft supplies in what used to be Mom's sewing room in the main house. Ramona photographed everything. This evidence proved premeditation, planning, and my mother's central role in the conspiracy. While I was reeling from that discovery, the 10th attack came. My Seattle apartment was broken into. The police report noted that my laptop was stolen, along with my external backup hard drive. Nothing else was taken, not my television or jewelry, or any of the typical items burglars target. This was about my case files. Id kept meticulous records of everything. Communications with lawyers, evidence photos, witness statements, financial documents. My IT friend Sutton hired managed to recover some files from cloud storage, but I'd been paranoid about putting certain things online. Interview notes with Dorothy, preliminary strategy memos from Harrison, draft complaints that outlined our full legal theory. Those existed only on the stolen laptop. Harrison delivered the devastating news. Without the complete evidence file, our case is weaker. We can still proceed, but our chances just dropped significantly, and the criminal charges might not stick without a complete evidence chain showing your documentation of the fraud as it was happening. Security footage from my apartment building showed a man in a hoodie and sunglasses entering during the day when most residents were at work. He knew exactly what he was looking for and left within 12 minutes. The police filed a report but held out little hope of recovery. Probably sold for parts by now, the officer said dismissively. Then I discovered who had made it possible. My cousin Tracy Ann Hayes had been calling me every week, offering support and sympathy. Shed asked detailed questions about my legal strategy, what evidence I had, where I kept important documents. Id trusted her because Shed seemed genuinely outraged by what my parents had done. The truth came out by accident when Trace's teenage daughter, my second cousin, posted on Instagram about visiting Aunt Mallory's place in Seattle last month, with a photo taken in my apartment building's lobby. Tracy had been in Seattle right before the break-in. Shed visited me, claimed she was in town for work, and Id let her into my apartment. Shed used the bathroom, asked for water, wandered around while I was making coffee. Shed been scouting for where I kept my devices, and Tracy was married to Garrett's wife's brother. The family loyalty ran through marriage ties Id underestimated. For the third time, I came close to complete defeat. I was sitting in the cabin surrounded by incomplete files, trying to reconstruct what had been stolen, when the weight of it all became unbearable. My father, mother, brother, extended family, cousin, even people Id trusted as allies had betrayed or abandoned me. My legal case was damaged. My money was almost gone. My reputation was destroyed. I walked out to the 40 acres, now technically still in Garrett's name but protected from immediate sale by the paid tax bill. I stood where Grandpa's old cabin had been before it burned down years ago. The foundation stones were still there, and I sat on them as the sun set behind the mountains. I can't do this anymore. I said out loud to no one. I thought about just signing the release papers Garrett's lawyer had sent months ago. I could walk away, rebuild my life somewhere else, try to forget this nightmare. Maybe family was more important than land. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe my mother was right and Id changed into someone Grandpa wouldn't recognize. Dorothy found me there just as darkness fell completely. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me on those cold foundation stones. 10 minutes passed in silence before she finally spoke. Your grandpa told me something once, must have been about 6 months before he died. We were sitting on his porch watching a storm roll in, and he said, "Bad people count on good people giving up. That's their whole strategy, Dorothy. Wear you down until surrendering seems easier than fighting." She handed me an envelope I hadn't seen her carrying. He gave this to me with specific instructions. He said, if Boyd or Garrett ever try to take Mallory's land, if they make her fight for what's hers, give her this when she needs it most. I've been waiting for the right moment. Inside was a flash drive. Video will, Dorothy explained. He recorded it in my living room 6 months before he died. I witnessed it, and so did my husband before he passed. The video has been in my safe deposit box ever since. We drove back to Dorothy's house, and she opened the file on her desktop computer. There on screen was Grandpa Theodore, sitting in the chair I recognized from Dorothy's living room. He looked thinner than I remembered from 6 months before his death, but his eyes were clear, and his voice was strong. I'm Theodore James Hayes, and I'm of sound mind making this video will on June 15th. I'm doing this because I don't trust my son-in-law Boyd Hayes, or his son Garrett. I love my granddaughter Mallory Catherine Hayes more than anything in this world, and I'm leaving her my 40 acres, not to be sold or transferred for 10 years minimum after my death. This land is her backbone, her foundation, her future. If anyone tries to change this will or take this land from her, it means they forged documents and committed fraud. Mallory, if you're watching this, it means they did exactly what I feared. Fight for what's yours, honey. Don't let them break you. He looked directly at the camera, and it felt like he was looking at me across time and death. You're stronger than you know, Mallory girl. I raised you to be strong. This land is yours because you're the only one who loved it like I did. Don't you dare give up. I sat in Dorothy's living room and cried like I hadn't cried through this entire nightmare. Then I felt something shift inside me. Steel replacing despair, determination replacing doubt. I looked at Dorothy and said, "This changes everything." Harrison Cole watched the video will 3 times, taking notes and consulting reference materials. When he finally looked up, his expression was triumphant. This is ironclad. Video wills are legal in Montana if properly witnessed and dated. The timestamp is embedded in the file metadata. Dorothy and her late husband witnessed it. Your grandfather clearly establishes his mental capacity and explicitly states his intent. This supersedes any modified probate will. Our new legal strategy came together quickly. File an emergency motion to void the land transfer immediately, submitting the video will as primary evidence. Attach Palmer Wright's testimony about the fraudulent transaction process. Include the forged signature analysis. Add the evidence of my mother's letters showing premeditation. Harrison filed the motion on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning, the response was explosive. Ramona published her biggest story yet. Video will exposes family fraud scheme in Montana land dispute. The article included screenshots from Grandpa's video, careful not to show too much but enough to prove its existence. She quoted Palmer Wright by name now since Head agreed to go public. She detailed the pattern of corruption involving Judge Pierce and my father. Within hours, the story was picked up by regional news outlets across Montana, then by national outlets looking for compelling human interest stories. The power dynamic shifted dramatically. The FBI field office in Montana, which had been moving slowly on the identity theft investigation, suddenly accelerated their timeline. The state attorney general's office announced they were reviewing Judge Pierce's case history for potential corruption charges. Judge Pierce, facing public scrutiny for the first time in his career, suddenly recused himself from all cases involving anyone related to my family. My father's friends in the county offices began distancing themselves, refusing to take his calls, claiming they couldn't discuss ongoing investigations. The courthouse employees who'd been hostile to me now treated me with nervous politeness. But Garrett, backed into a corner, made increasingly desperate moves. He filed for bankruptcy, claiming he needed to protect his assets from my lawsuit. He listed the 40 acres as part of his bankruptcy estate, trying to shield it from any judgment I might win. He moved his family out of state to Idaho, liquidating his construction business assets and trying to hide money in accounts under his wife's name. He was making himself judgment-proof or trying to, frantically moving pieces around the board before checkmate. The family fractured along unexpected lines. My uncle, my father's younger brother, whom I'd barely spoken to in years, called me one afternoon. I didn't know the whole story, Mallory. I believed what Boyd told us. What they did was wrong. He apologized for the harsh things Head said months ago and offered to testify about my father's character, about how Boyd had always been obsessed with controlling family assets. 3 of my cousins reached out similarly, admitting they'd been fed lies and offering support now that the truth was emerging. Even my grandmother, who'd screamed at me about destroying the family, called in tears after watching clips of Grandpa's video will on the news. I'm so sorry. I believed their version without questioning it. Your grandfather loved you so much, and I should have trusted his judgment. These reconciliations felt hollow after months of hatred and accusations, but I accepted them with cautious gratitude. At least some family members were capable of admitting when they were wrong. My mother showed up at the cabin one morning, unannounced. I watched through the security camera as she got out of her car and approached the door. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, shed lost weight, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. When I opened the door, she tried to push past me into the cabin, but I blocked her path. "We need to talk," she said. I crossed my arms and stayed in the doorway. "Say what you came to say." She tried the sympathy approach first. "I'm still your mother, Mallory. Please don't destroy our family." I shook my head. "You destroyed it when you forged my signature and stole my inheritance. You planned this for years." She switched tactics, trying to make me feel guilty. "Garrett is going to lose everything. His children, your niece and nephew, will suffer because of your selfishness." That word, selfishness, snapped something inside me. "You committed multiple felonies because you were jealous of Grandpa's love for me. You involved Garrett in fraud because you wanted to punish me. And now you're going to blame me for the consequences of your crimes." She started to cry, but the tears felt manipulative. "I made mistakes, but you're making this so much worse. Can't you just let it go?" I looked at this woman who'd raised me from age 10, who'd tucked me in at night and made me breakfast before school, and felt nothing but emptiness. "No, I can't let it go. And you should leave now." She stood there for another minute, perhaps hoping it'd change my mind, then walked back to her car. Before driving away, she rolled down her window and shouted, "You're dead to me." I went back inside and didn't cry. Palmer Wright testified before a grand jury investigating the corruption charges. He brought documentation showing a pattern of fraudulent transactions my father had facilitated over 15 years. Bank records subpoenaed by federal investigators confirmed the $12,000 payment to the registrar's clerk. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the clerk accepted a plea deal and agreed to testify against my father and Garrett in exchange for reduced charges. The credit card companies confirmed the identity theft was part of a coordinated scheme, and fraud charges were formally filed against Garrett. My former employer, the outdoor equipment company that had fired me, reopened their investigation after Harrison sent them evidence that the expense reports had been forged using the same technique as the land transfer documents. They quietly offered me a settlement to avoid a wrongful termination lawsuit, which I accepted. It wasn't full vindication, but it was something. And then came the 12th attack, though by this point it felt more like a desperate flail than a strategic strike. While I was at Harrison's office for a strategy meeting, someone vandalized the cabin where I'd been staying. Every window was smashed. Furniture was destroyed. Walls were spray-painted with the words, "Family Traitor" in red paint. I returned to find the sheriff already there taking photos. For once, he seemed genuinely concerned rather than dismissive. The media attention had made it impossible to ignore crimes against me anymore. Forensics found fingerprints at the scene that matched Clifford Dunn, Garrett's business partner and the man whose truck I'd seen circling my previous rental. Clifford was arrested within 24 hours. Faced with charges for vandalism, destruction of property, and intimidation, he immediately offered to flip on Garrett. "I'll tell you everything," he told investigators. "Garrett promised me a partnership, said we'd develop the land together and split the profits." He showed me projections of making $2.4 million once the highway exit was built. He told me his parents had handled all the legal stuff and it was clean. Clifford provided text messages, emails, and financial projections that proved Garrett had planned to profit massively from the stolen land. Had already lined up buyers for subdivided lots. Had negotiated with contractors for infrastructure. Had created an entire development plan based on property had obtained through fraud. Harrison filed an emergency motion to halt any land transactions, citing the new evidence of Garrett's intent to sell. A judge from a different county, brought in specifically because every local judge was now viewed as potentially compromised, granted a temporary restraining order. Garrett could not sell, develop, or transfer the land in any way pending resolution of the case. The timber company that had bought logging rights for $80,000 received a legal warning from Harrison. They immediately ceased all operations and froze their relationship with Garrett, not wanting to be implicated in a criminal fraud case. Then the dominoes really started falling. The grand jury issued indictments. Boyd Hayes, my father, faced charges of fraud, forgery, bribery of a public official, and conspiracy. Garrett Hayes faced charges of fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and witness intimidation. Marlene Hayes, my mother, faced charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to forgery. The registrar's clerk received separate charges but was testifying for the prosecution as part of his plea deal. Judge Raymond Pierce was placed under investigation by the State Judicial Ethics Board and suspended from hearing cases pending the outcome. All criminal trials were set for 6 months out. The civil case to void the land transfer was scheduled for 3 months, and I realized, standing in Harrison's office, looking at the court calendar, that I might actually win this. After 8 months of hell, after losing my job and my savings and my family and nearly losing my sanity, justice was finally within reach. The civil trial began on a cold morning in March in a county seat 3 hours from my hometown. The change of venue had been granted because every local judge and jury pool was now tainted by media coverage and personal connections to my family. Harrison Cole led my legal team, flanked by 2 young associates who'd been working around the clock for weeks. Across the courtroom sat Garrett's attorney, paid for with money my parents had borrowed against their house, and my father's attorney. The courtroom was packed with journalists, townspeople, who'd driven hours to watch Dorothy and her friends, and extended family members on both sides of the divide. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Julia Harrington, with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the court to order. Harrison's opening statement laid out the case methodically. He played Grandpa's video will first, and I watched the jury's faces as they saw this elderly man clearly and explicitly state his wishes. Some jurors looked moved, others looked angry that anyone would disrespect such clear intentions. Palmer Wright took the stand and walked through the fraudulent transaction process step by step, explaining how my father had bribed him, how the timeline had been manipulated, how documents had been backdated. Under cross-examination, Garrett's lawyer tried to paint Palmer as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind, but Palmer remained calm and factual. The forensic handwriting expert testified next, showing blown-up images of my real signature compared to the forged signature on the land transfer documents. She pointed out subtle differences in pressure, angle, and letter formation that proved conclusively the signature was not mine. "This is a skilled forgery," she said. "But it's definitely not the work of the claimed signer." Bank records were entered into evidence showing the $12,000 payment from my father to the registrar's clerk, with timestamps that corresponded exactly to when the fraudulent paperwork was processed. Dorothy took the stand and described witnessing Grandpa's original will, his clear mental state, his explicit concerns that my father would try to manipulate the inheritance. She spoke about the journals Shed kept documenting Grandpa's statements over years. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to suggest Dorothy was biased because she was my friend, but she shut that down immediately. "I didn't become her friend until after this fraud was committed. I'm here because Ted Hayes was my neighbor for 40 years, and I won't let his wishes be ignored." The defense's strategy was increasingly desperate. Garrett's lawyer argued this was a family dispute best resolved privately, not a criminal matter. He tried to claim the video will was unclear about exact timing and that I'd waited too long to contest the transfer. He attempted to paint me as a wealthy, successful woman from Seattle who didn't need the land while Garrett was a struggling father of 2. He brought up my career and salary, suggesting I was too privileged to deserve sympathy. When I took the stand, Harrison guided me through my testimony chronologically. I described my relationship with Grandpa, the summers spent on his land, what he taught me about life and integrity. I explained how I learned about the theft at my birthday dinner and the systematic campaign of attacks that followed. I detailed the identity theft, the job loss, the intimidation, the vandalism. I described finding my mother's letters, planning the whole scheme, and the moment I realized how deep the betrayal went. Under cross-examination, Garrett's attorney was aggressive, trying to rattle me. "Isn't it true you rarely visited your family in recent years?" he asked. "I visited as often as my work schedule allowed," I responded calmly. "Isn't it true you resented your brother for having children when you're still single?" "No, that's completely false. Isn't it true you've spent over $100,000 on this lawsuit out of pure spite?" "I've spent every penny I had to defend my legal rights against fraud." "That's not spite, that's self-defense." He tried to make me cry or lose my temper, but it'd been through too much to break now. I answered every question clearly and directly. When I stepped down, I saw several jurors nodding slightly, and I felt a small surge of hope. The surprise came on the third day of trial. Garrett's wife, whose name was actually Jennifer, not Vanessa as it'd been told, appeared as a witness for my side. Harrison had subpoenaed her, but we weren't sure she'd actually testify truthfully. She'd filed for divorce 2 months earlier, and apparently the end of her marriage had freed her conscience. Garrett admitted to me that he and his parents forged Mallory's signature. Jennifer testified, her voice shaking but clear. He laughed about it. He said his dad had connections and Mallory would never win against them. He showed me projections of how much money we'd make from developing the land. She provided text messages between herself and Garrett, between Garrett and his parents, showing the conspiracy in their own words. The defense table erupted in chaos, Garrett leaning over to whisper furiously to his lawyer, my parents sitting rigid with shock. Jennifer continued, describing Garrett's plans to hide assets through bankruptcy, his move to Idaho to avoid accountability, his complete lack of remorse. He told me Mallory deserved what she got for being so stubborn. Those were his exact words. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to paint her as a vengeful ex-wife, but her testimony was too detailed, too corroborated by the text messages, to be dismissed. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I stayed in a hotel near the courthouse, barely eating, unable to sleep more than a few hours at a time. Dorothy sat with me, along with Harrison and Sutton, who'd driven in to support me. On the afternoon of the second day, we got the call that the jury had reached a verdict. My hands shook as we walked back into the courtroom. Judge Harrington asked the foreperson to read the verdict. In the matter of Hayes versus Hayes, we find in favor of the plaintiff Mallory Catherine Hayes. The land transfer executed 18 months ago is hereby declared void due to fraud and forgery. Ownership of the 40-acre property reverts immediately and entirely to Mallory Catherine Hayes. Furthermore, we find that defendant Garrett Hayes must pay the plaintiff's legal fees in the amount of $138,000 and must return the $80,000 obtained from the sale of timber rights, which was conducted without legitimate ownership. I heard Dorothy gasp beside me. Harrison squeezed my shoulder. Across the courtroom, Garrett dropped his head into his hands while my parents sat frozen. Judge Harrington added additional terms. A permanent restraining order is hereby issued. Boyd Hayes, Marlene Hayes, and Garrett Hayes are prohibited from contacting Mallory Catherine Hayes directly or indirectly. They are prohibited from entering the property at any time. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. The criminal trials that followed were almost anticlimactic compared to the civil case. My father, faced with overwhelming evidence and the civil verdict already against him, accepted a plea deal. He pled guilty to reduced charges of conspiracy and bribery, receiving 3 years of probation, a $10,000 fine, and a permanent mark on his record. Garrett went to trial and was convicted of fraud and identity theft. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, though he ultimately served only 9 months before being paroled. My mother accepted a plea deal as well, receiving 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service for conspiracy charges. Judge Pierce was forced into retirement, his pension reduced due to ethics violations, and he faced a separate civil lawsuit from other families whose probate cases had corrupted. The registrar's clerk served 1 year in jail and was permanently barred from public employment. The aftermath left permanent scars on everyone involved. My relationship with my parents was severed completely. We haven't spoken in over a year since the verdict, and I don't foresee that changing. Garrett's life fell apart entirely. His wife divorced him, he lost his business to bankruptcy, and he came out of prison to find himself unemployable in his field with a criminal record. Extended family remained split. About half reached out to apologize and tried to rebuild relationships with me. The other half still blamed me for destroying the family, and we simply don't communicate anymore. I returned to Seattle initially after the trial, needing the familiar comfort of my old life. I got a new job with a smaller outdoor equipment company, taking a pay cut but grateful for the fresh start. But I felt pulled back to Montana in a way I couldn't ignore. The land called to me, and I realized that Grandpa had been right. It was my backbone, my foundation. I decided to make it my home. I started working remotely as a freelance marketing consultant, which gave me flexibility to live anywhere. I used some of the money I'd recovered from Garrett to build a small cabin on the property, nothing fancy but comfortable and mine. The cabin had solar panels, a well for water, and a garden where I grew vegetables in the summer. I worked from a desk overlooking the meadow where Grandpa used to walk every morning. I established a conservation easement on the land, legally preventing it from ever being developed. The 40 acres would remain wild, or at least as wild as a small farm could be, forever. Eventually, I planned to donate the development rights to a land trust, ensuring that even after I was gone, Grandpa's land would be protected. Dorothy became the grandmother figure I'd lost. We had coffee every Sunday morning, continuing the tradition Shed shared with Grandpa. She helped me plant my garden, taught me her recipes, and shared stories about the old days. Harrison Cole remained a friend, stopping by occasionally when he had business in the area. Ramona wrote a follow-up article about my recovery and the ongoing corruption investigations her initial reporting had sparked. I started dating again, cautiously, though trust issues made relationships difficult. I met a wildlife biologist named Wade who worked for the State Forest Service. He understood my love for the land, my need for space and independence. We took things slowly, and I found myself genuinely happy for the first time in years. Maybe marriage was in my future, maybe not. Either way, I no longer needed external validation to feel complete. 2 years after the verdict, I received a letter in the mail from my mother. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope. Inside was 3 pages of apology, explaining that Shed been jealous and bitter, that Shed let her resentment poison her judgment, that she understood now how wrong Shed been. She asked if we could talk, if reconciliation was possible. I read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer. Some wounds were too deep to heal. Some bridges stayed burned. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. Maybe that made me hard or unforgiving, but it also meant I was protecting myself from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. 3 years after that devastating birthday dinner, I'm 35 years old and living full-time on Grandpa's 40 acres. My cabin is finished now with upgrades. I've added slowly over time. Solar panels provide all my power. The well water is clean and cold. My garden produces more vegetables than I can eat, so I share with Dorothy and sell extras at the farmer's market in town. I work remotely for several clients, earning enough to live comfortably without the corporate stress I used to endure. I don't need my parents' approval or my family's acceptance anymore. I've found peace in independence. The healing journey was long and difficult. Therapy helped me process the betrayal trauma that left me with trust issues and occasional panic attacks. PTSD from the intimidation attacks faded slowly, over years, not weeks. I learned that family is defined by who supports you, not just who shares your blood. Dorothy, Harrison, Ramona, the community members who donated to save my land, those people became my real family. Garrett was released from prison after 9 months for good behavior. He moved to Idaho permanently, where he works in construction for someone else's company. Child support takes most of his income, and he rarely sees his kids, according to Jennifer, who's now remarried and apparently much happier. Last I heard, Garrett still blames me for everything, telling anyone who'll listen that I destroyed his life over greed. He learned nothing from the experience. My parents divorced about a year after the criminal trials concluded. The stress of the legal battles, the financial burden of attorney fees, and the fundamental breach of trust between them proved too much for their marriage to survive. My father moved to Arizona to live near his sister, maintaining minimal contact with anyone from Montana. My mother still lives in town, working retail at a clothing store. She lost most of her social standing after the truth came out. Friends abandoned her, and she's apparently attending therapy, though I don't know if she's actually dealing with her issues or just going through the motions. She sends me cards on my birthday and Christmas, which I don't open. Extended family relationships remain complicated. My uncle and 3 cousins rebuilt their relationships with me, and we now spend Thanksgiving together along with Dorothy and some of her family. It's a chosen family gathering, people who've proven their loyalty and integrity. The relatives who sided with my parents and still blame me for the family's destruction are simply not part of my life anymore. I realized over time that I don't actually miss them. The relationships had been superficial anyway, built on obligation rather than genuine connection. The land itself has transformed beautifully. The 40 acres are thriving with organic vegetable gardens, berry bushes, and wildflower meadows I've planted to support pollinators. I host farm-to-table dinners twice a month during summer, inviting community members to share meals made from food grown on the property. Local kids visit for environmental education programs where I teach them what Grandpa taught me about reading nature, respecting the land, and understanding our place in the ecosystem. The property feels alive in a way it didn't when it was just sitting empty during the years of legal battles. Grandpa would be proud. My freelance marketing business is successful, focusing on outdoor and environmental companies whose values align with mine. I earn about $70,000 a year, less than my old corporate salary, but more than enough for my simple lifestyle. My savings have rebuilt to a comfortable level. I don't define myself by career success anymore. I've found purpose in sustainable living, in community building, in honoring Grandpa's legacy. My relationship with Wade, the wildlife biologist, has deepened over 2 years. He respects my boundaries and understands why trust is difficult for me. We've talked about moving in together eventually, maybe marriage someday, but there's no rush. I've learned that I don't need a relationship to validate my worth or complete my life. If it happens, wonderful. If not, I'm genuinely okay with that too. Last month, I received an unexpected message. Jennifer, Garrett's ex-wife, reached out asking if I'd be willing to meet my niece and nephew. They're now 11 and 14, old enough to understand what happened and old enough to form their own opinions about family. They ask about you, Jennifer wrote. They've heard Garrett's version, but they're smart kids and they know there's more to the story. No pressure, but if you're open to it, maybe we could arrange something. I thought about it for days. Those kids were innocent in all of this, just collateral damage from their father's crimes and their grandparents' cruelty. I wrote back saying I'd consider it, maybe in another year when more time had passed. The wounds were still too fresh to pretend everything was fine, but eventually, maybe I could have some relationship with them. They were the only truly blameless people in the entire Hayes family disaster. Dorothy turned 77 this year and still farms her land, though I help her with the heavy work now. Every Sunday morning we have coffee on her porch or mine, depending on the weather, and we talk about everything and nothing. She's been telling me stories about Grandpa I'd never heard, filling in gaps in my understanding of who he was. Your grandpa would be so proud of you, she told me recently. You didn't just save the land. You saved yourself. That observation hit me hard because it was true. This fight had never been only about property. The deepest lesson I learned is that not all family deserves your loyalty. Blood relation doesn't justify abuse, theft, or betrayal. Walking away from toxic people, even parents or siblings, isn't selfishness. It's self-preservation and self-love. I spent months feeling guilty about the family rift, wondering if I was being too stubborn, too unforgiving. Therapy helped me understand that I'd tried to maintain relationships that were already dead. My parents had chosen greed over integrity. Garrett had chosen easy money over ethics. They'd made their choices, and the consequences were theirs to bear, not mine to fix. Another crucial lesson was about fighting back against bullies, even family bullies. Systems of power, corrupt judges and officials, and local good old boy networks can feel insurmountable, but they can be challenged. Documentation, persistence, community support, and refusing to be silenced can overcome even entrenched conspiracy. If he'd given up after losing my job, or after the break-in, or after any of the dozen times I wanted to quit, they would have won forever. The pattern would have continued, maybe to victimize other families. Standing up stopped the cycle. I also learned that material possessions can carry deep meaning beyond their monetary value. The land was never really about the $450,000 appraisal or even the potential $1.2 million future value. It represented love, legacy, connection, and identity. Grandpa's gift was him saying, "You matter, Mallory. Your dreams matter. Your future matters." Fighting for the land was fighting for my own worth and dignity. Losing it would have meant accepting that I was less important than Garrett, that my parents' cruelty was justified, that Grandpa's love for me was meaningless. I couldn't let that stand. Healing from betrayal trauma is real and takes years, not weeks or months. Professional therapy wasn't weakness but necessary treatment for psychological wounds as real as physical injuries. Healing isn't linear. I still have bad days where the anxiety spikes, or the anger resurfaces, or the sadness overwhelms me. But those days are less frequent now. Eventually, the pain transformed into wisdom, into understanding human nature, into knowing my own strength. The suffering wasn't pointless, even though I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Perhaps the most profound lesson was about redefining family. The family you choose, the people who show up when you're at your lowest, who believe you when everyone else calls you a liar, who donate money they can barely afford to save your land, those people are more valuable than blood ties. Loyalty must be earned through actions, not demanded because of genetics. I can love people from a distance or not at all, and both are valid choices. Creating a chosen family isn't sad or pathetic. It's brave and honest. It's refusing to accept crumbs of affection from people who've proven they don't truly care. Every Sunday morning, when Dorothy's truck pulls up and Wade joins me on the porch and we drink coffee while watching sunrise over the mountains, I feel surrounded by family. Real family. The kind that doesn't steal from you or lie to you or try to destroy you when you don't comply with their demands. I keep one photograph on my desk in the cabin. It's that old picture of me and Grandpa from when I was 10, standing on this land with his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera. Head written on the back, Mallory Girl and Her Land, Summer 2003. Every time I doubt myself or wonder if the fight was worth the cost, I look at that picture and remember his words from the video. Will. You're stronger than you know, Mallory Girl. This land is yours because you're the only one who loved it like I did. Don't you dare give up. I didn't give up, Grandpa. I fought for what was mine. I survived betrayal that would have broken a weaker person. I stood up to corruption and conspiracy and cruelty, and I won. Not just the land, though that was important. I won my self-respect. I won the knowledge that I could face the worst of humanity and come out intact on the other side. I won freedom from toxic people who'd tried to define my worth by their standards. This morning, I received an email from my mother. The subject line read, "Please read this." I stared at it for a long minute, cursor hovering over the delete button. Part of me wants to know what she has to say. Part of me doesn't care anymore. I haven't decided yet whether I'll open it, whether forgiveness is something I can offer, whether reconciliation is even possible or desirable after everything that happened. Maybe I'll read it later. Maybe I'll delete it unread. The point is, the choice is mine now. I have my power back. Whatever I decide about that email, about forgiveness, about the future, it's on my terms. Nobody is manipulating me or pressuring me or stealing from me anymore. That autonomy, that self-determination, is what winning really means. I'm sitting on my porch as I tell you this story, drinking coffee as the sun rises over 40 acres of Montana land that belongs to me, legally and morally and eternally. The land Grandpa wanted me to have, the land I almost lost, the land I fought for and won, and am, finally, genuinely at peace. So let me ask you, have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you faced betrayal from people you trusted completely? How did you handle it? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe that standing up for yourself isn't selfish even when family calls it that, please hit the like button. Subscribe to this channel because I'll be sharing more stories about overcoming family trauma and choosing yourself when it's the hardest thing to do. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in facing toxic family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but if it helps even one person find the courage to fight for what's rightfully theirs, then every painful moment was worth it. I wish you strength, peace, and the courage to walk away from people who don't deserve you, even if they share your name. Take care of yourselves out there.